What's going on, everybody? Before this episode starts, I just want to say that this is an absolutely cursed episode that I have been trying to get out for months. It's nothing spectacular, it's nothing super special, but every time I go to do this episode, so for example, when I recorded this episode, this is an episode I thought was just really bad when I did it. I'm like, oh, this isn't good, I'm not going to release it. It turns out I was just really sick when I did this episode, and then it turns out when I went to edit this episode for it to come out this week when it releases, I'm also getting sick again. Every time I try to do this episode, I just get sick or something comes up. So yeah, this episode's cursed. So if it sounds a little bit off, it's because I'm very sick in this episode and trying to hide it, not doing a super great job. But yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know that before this episode starts. And this is going to be a part of New November. So this whole month, I'm just going to be taking a look at a lot of newer movies. So I'm starting off with Fear Below, and you look forward to things like Beast of War. And I think there was another one with Scout Taylor Compton that I'm going to look at as well. So yeah, just a quick intro before this episode starts, and let's just get right into it.
What the hell?
I'm a sea king, a CGI thing. I'm here to eat and bare my teeth and shake a tail fin. A bikini babe, catching a road wave. A big surprise, I'm gonna rise and flash my tooth cave. All the buff dudes, safe on the beach food. They're gonna need a bigger boat and barrels real soon. I'm a sea king, a CGI thing. I'm here to eat and bare my teeth and shake a tail fin. I'm only taking a ride. Lured in by your bucket of chum. It's one weakness I can't hide. Take me to your bucket of chum.
Welcome back to Bucket of Chum, everybody. I'm your host, Captain Steve, and this week we're talking about Fear Below from 2024, directed by Matthew Holmes. So this is an Australian movie. It's a newer movie because I had something else lined up, but I saw that this was available to rent, so I decided I wanted to check this one out because it's been on my radar for a while now. I did actually do a trailer react for this, but I don't think the audio recorded or something like that, so I ended up not ever releasing it. So I have seen a trailer for this movie before, but I wanted to check out something a little bit newer too, because it's been a while since we've watched like pretty much a new movie on this podcast, so I thought this would be something interesting to check out. So let's start off like we always do, and let's get into the Letterboxd plot synopsis. You won't see it coming. A ragtag team of divers attempting to salvage a sunken car from a river are thwarted by a highly aggressive bull shark. Pretty basic plot. It has an average rating of 2.3 stars on Letterboxd. And as I mentioned, the poster expectations are a bit tricky for this one because I've seen the trailer before. But also, when I was looking up the posters for these, IMDb has a poster and Letterboxd has a different poster, which happens a lot with a lot of the movies. I usually just go with the Letterboxd one. The Letterboxd poster, and I think even the rental poster that I saw for this movie, is terrible. It is one of the worst fucking posters I have ever seen, and it definitely doesn't belong with this movie. So the first poster that I saw is the one that's still up on IMDb, and it's basically got like this 1940s, 1950s diver with the shadow of a shark behind them. Really cool and ominous looking poster. Now the one that's on Letterboxd uses the same goddamn Adobe stock photo of a shark that I have seen in like dozens of other shark movie posters, and then it's got like the diver in its mouth or something like that. It's just awful. Like when I see that poster, I'm just like, okay, I'm expecting terrible CGI because they're using the same shark model that I've seen in dozens of other low budget movies. But then I look at the IMDb one and I'm like, oh, this is going to be like kind of a period piece, ominous sort of flick, whereas like the Letterboxd poster doesn't give me that impression at all. So I have a lot of mixed feelings based on the posters and even on the trailer. So going into this movie, I actually really didn't quite know what to expect. Now, this movie stars Hermione Corfield, who I've seen in Sea Fever, which I covered on Patreon a while ago. So if you want to hear that episode, you can go to patreon.com/bucket of chum, and you can support the podcast for $2 or $3 a month, depending on where you live. And each month you get an exclusive episode. If you can't do that, if you could just like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, or give a 5-star rating or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts, any and all of those things are greatly appreciated and definitely help the podcast out. But now it's time to take a look at Fear Below, which is also what I call my penis. So let's dive in. So we start off following a car and a truck driving down the road, and then this box falls out at the back of the truck, so everybody stops and they put the box back on, and it says New South Wales Bank on it. And this is an Australian movie. I'm not sure if I mentioned that, but yeah, it's an Australian flick. And then the truck driver sees something in the middle of the road and swerves out of the way, and then this truck ends up crashing into the river down below. This part was very dodgy with the CGI. Like, when I saw this, I was like, oh, I am not excited for this at all, because it was pretty bad. I mean, it took place at night, so they get away with quite a bit here, but it's still like, it's still not great. I wasn't excited when I saw this part. But anyways, the car behind them stops and they pull the two men out of the river as the truck is sinking. And as the two men get out, their leader, Dylan Bull Maddock, so his middle name / nickname is Bull. I don't even know if they actually say this in the movie. That's just how he's credited. But I'm just like, you have a bull shark and your main villain has the name Bull. I'm like, it's a bit on the nose, but it's fine. So he gives them shit for crashing the truck or whatever, and they just say, it was standing in the middle of the road, what were we supposed to do? I have no idea what was in the middle of this road. I have no idea what they're even fucking talking about, and we never will learn. I thought that, like, something would come back to this later on, like it would be some sort of, like, weird twist or reveal, but instead we just have no fucking idea. So I'm just like, oh, okay, I guess we're just gonna... Or maybe they do say what it is and I just missed it, but, like, we definitely don't really see anything, so it's just... I don't know, I guess this is just where the low budget was kind of a detriment to the movie, but anyways, the driver basically just reassures Dylan that it's like, hey, at least it's safe, we can go and get it later, nobody's going to know where it is, so it should be perfectly fine. But then Dylan has his right-hand man, Yanis or Janis. I think he's like a Russian in this movie, but he has him stab the driver in the neck and kill him right there. And then the passenger of the truck says that they could use a crane, but Bull says, or Dylan, I guess we'll just call him Dylan. I don't really want to call him Bull for this episode. That's kind of too on the nose. So Dylan says, like, that's going to draw way too much attention, and they need divers. Now, this term is very new to everybody because this takes place in the 40s, so he has to explain, like, what divers are. And he's like, yeah, it's the one with the big helmets, and they go underwater. I'm like, that's very basic, but I guess that's some way of explaining it. So they walk away, and then just in the water down below, we see some splashing, and then we get our title card that comes up. And then we see Jimmy, a Aborigine diver coming out of the water, helped by Clara, who's played by Hermione. And they're having issues, like, fixing something or whatever, so they kind of, like, banter back and forth for a second. But anyways, they end up going back to the shop, and she starts asking about Ernie, and Jimmy says he's still sleeping, and I guess because Ernie was up the night before drinking or whatever. So Ernie is like the boss of both of them, but he was up drinking the night before, and he's still fucking sleeping, and it's like noon at this point. So Clara goes and wakes him up and, like, tells him that they paid for, like, some new hose or something like that, and then, like, a bunch of other business nonsense. And then he tells her that they didn't get some big contract that they were hoping to get, and so he's not going to be able to pay her or Jimmy for, like, the next month, basically. She stays optimistic and says, like, they'll survive somehow, and then tells him to get up and, like, go and help Jimmy, and she's going to go fix something on the truck. So while she's doing that, Dylan and Janis arrive, or Yanis. I think it's probably Yanis, but anyways... they ask her who the boss is, and she says Ernie, but he's a little busy right now. But she says, like, she can help, but they insist on talking to the boss because it's the 1940s and they don't want to talk to a woman. That's basically what it comes down to. That's not me trying to be an asshole. That's just basically what they're trying to do here. So she tells Ernie, he goes inside and meets with Dylan and says he heard Ernie is the man to ask about a special job. So they go into Ernie's office and they shoot the shit for a while. And it turns out they were both in the army, so they kind of bond over that for a little bit. And then Dylan asks about, like, Ernie's dive experience. So Dylan gives him the basics, find the car, bring it back. And then Ernie tries to ask, like, what they're salvaging. But Dylan says, like, this job is, like, no questions asked. You just have to do it. And he offers him, like, $250 up front. And then another $250 when they finish the job. So Ernie seems pretty happy with that because, like, back then that was a shit ton of money. So these two leave, and then Ernie tells Clara and Jimmy that they've got their meal ticket. So they start packing up to get ready for this job, and then Clara asks like questions about like who they're working for, and then he shows her the money, and suddenly she just doesn't give a shit. She's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, I'm all on board with this," and she's excited about it. Because at this point, then they can go and buy a boat and do like a deep sea dive that she's been wanting to do. But he then again clarifies, like, this is only if we don't ask any questions. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay. So she's totally on board. And I mean, it's the late 40s, early 50s. So it's like, fuck it. It was easier to get away with crime back then, anyways. So yeah, fuck it. So they start driving and they finally meet up with Yanis, who then drives them to basically the site of the accident. And then they meet Dylan there, who's waiting for them. And so Ernie introduces Clara and Jimmy to Dylan, and he's immediately not super happy because he's like, Clara is a woman, and he uses the term darky to describe Jimmy, which I'm not going to use for the rest of this fucking movie, but that's the word that he uses. So he's not happy that there's a woman and an Aborigine basically part of this dive team. He basically just tells Ernie that he wants like the best people for this dive, and then Ernie is like, well, these are the best people for this dive. And so Dylan then goes and asks Jimmy and Claire, like, kind of what their qualifications are, what their experience is. And Jimmy says that he's been diving since he was a kid and he spent a lot of time in the water. And then Clara just, like, lists off a bunch of qualifications and, like, she worked in the shipyards during the war. And then Dylan seems pretty satisfied with this, and also he doesn't really have much of a fucking choice, so he goes with it. And then Ernie tells Clara she and Jimmy will be going in the water. He doesn't want to wander around in that muck, and Clara's happy about that because she wants the diving experience. And then Yanis asks Dylan like what they should tell them is in the boxes, and he says he'll figure something out. But once they're done, they're just going to kill them anyway, so it doesn't really matter if they figure it out. So yeah, that kind of sucks for them. Nobody else knows this. They just think they're doing a nice little simple job, but it's not. Clara and Jimmy then get suited up. Ernie starts getting their air hoses ready, and they start walking into the water. So basically, instead of having a tank, they just have like these giant air tubes running up to like a compressor up on land. So yeah, very inconvenient, and yeah, this obviously becomes a problem later on. And we kind of cut back and forth between Clara and Jimmy's POV, and it's just like very murky, muddy water. But I think they definitely did dry for wet, which basically you film in like a dry environment and play it off like they're in the water. I will say it looked like some of the bubbles might have been CGI coming off their suits. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain they did. But it doesn't actually look terrible. Like it feels like they're obviously supposed to be underwater, and I think they did like at least a half decent job of that. But I do feel like some of their movements felt like they were on dry land. Like it didn't feel like they were necessarily moving in water. But it's not as bad as it could have been. Like this could have looked way worse. And once you start getting into the movie a little bit, like you kind of stop noticing it because you're just kind of invested in what's going on. So it does start to look a little bit better. And Jimmy spots something big swimming along the way, and he tells Clara, and they look around, but they don't see anything, so they continue on. They eventually come across the truck, and they actually radioed up to like Ernie so he can hear them talking. So they tell Ernie on the radio and lets Dylan know that they found the truck. So they get to the truck and tell Ernie that they can't winch it up with a crane because it's just on its side, so it's stuck. But Dylan doesn't care about the truck. He just wants the boxes that are inside. So they move around the truck, they look inside, and they see all the boxes. They try to open up the back, but it's locked, so they go and grab the keys from the ignition. And then we see the shark swim past them, but they obviously haven't noticed it yet. And as Clara is trying to get into the truck, she's knocked down by the shark, and she tells Jimmy she was knocked down by something big, but doesn't know what yet. And so they start looking around, and then Clara is grabbed by the shark, which starts swimming off with her, and she can just see, like, inside the shark's mouth. So I guess these suits are, like, actually, like, pretty sturdy for the most part, like, especially the helmets, probably. But the shark does eventually just drop her. Which sort of makes sense, because if it's not tasting any blood or anything, then it's probably just like, well, why am I carrying this thing around? This is dumb. So I will say this isn't like totally outlandish that it would just drop her, because I don't think she was like super injured or even really injured at all by this. But unfortunately, this is where her airline gets ripped out because the shark went swimming off with her. So Jimmy goes and looks for her. He finds her. He tells Ernie that he's found her, and him and Yanis then start reeling in the airline that Jimmy has reattached to her, so to try and bring her up as fast as they possibly can. So they manage to make it to the surface. They get Clara's helmet off, and she finally comes to. And then Jimmy pulls a shark tooth out of her suit, and he shows it to Ernie. And Dylan doesn't believe that there's a shark because they're in a river. So this is where we get the whole explanation of like why bull sharks are in the river and blah, blah, blah. I've done this 100 times. I'm not going to do it again. Yeah, bull shark can go in river and seawater because blah, blah, blah. But basically, I think they explain this as, like, this is where the bull sharks come up to breed, basically. And then Clara says that this thing was, like, 12 to 15 feet long. And Dylan's like, oh, well, that's not that big. And she's like, yeah, most bull sharks get to be, like, 8 feet. So this thing is massive. And it's probably an adult female that's come up here to breed. So it's, like, not in a great mood, I guess, or something like that. But also the fact that bull sharks are the most aggressive sharks. So, like, that's going to be a pretty big problem. And then Ernie tells Dylan that they're not getting back in the water until somebody deals with the shark. And then Dylan says that they should just deal with it, but they won't. So Dylan then says he'll find some fishermen to deal with it, but any money that he has to use is basically going to come out of their final pay. So Dylan and his crew leave while the other three are like setting up camp. And then Ernie tells Jimmy he did a good job and tells him to like find out what's actually in those boxes next time he's down, but to kind of keep it hush-hush just between those two, I guess. And then Ernie goes and checks up on Clara and tells her she did a great job, and if she wants to stay topside next time, she can. And then Dylan and his crew return later on and tells them they found a local fisherman in town who will be there in the morning. They pass some whiskey around, and Jimmy declines. And apparently, I'm just assuming that this was true. It was illegal for the natives to drink, but he also, like, was in the military and fought for their country. And I'm just like, this typical shitty racist behavior is just insane. The fact that it happened across, like, so many different countries. And I'm like, no wonder people hate white people. Like, this shit was happening everywhere. Like, this is so dumb. Anyways, that's a rant for a whole other thing. But that night, Clara and Jimmy are talking about sharks, and Jimmy has been attacked by sharks before, and she asks if that's where he got, like, this scar on his arm, but he's like, no, that's from the war. And then he tells her about, like, his uncle and father hunting sharks and tells Clara that it's best to just, like, get back in the water, like, don't let the fear get to you, just get right back in there. And then Dylan comes over and he's like, oh yeah, that's really good advice. And then he comments on like how much Ernie can drink, and then like Jimmy kind of leaves the conversation, probably because he wants nothing to do with Dylan. And then so he starts chatting up Clara and asking how they all met and shit like that. And so she starts asking him questions like what's in those boxes, and he says like grooming products, which like he's clearly lying about. And yeah, she obviously doesn't believe him and says that like they have an early start, so she's going to go to bed. Clara and Jimmy have to help Ernie to his tent because he's drunk off his ass. And her and Jimmy tell Ernie that they don't trust this guy and like they should just like leave the job in the morning, like just forget about it. It's not worth it. But Ernie refuses because there's no other jobs coming along and like they really need the money. So morning comes, everyone emerges from their tents, and then this police officer on horseback arrives, and Ernie greets him and tells him like what they're doing, and starts asking questions like why they're there, why they didn't report this. And Ernie's like, listen, you got to go talk to Dylan, that guy over there, because it's not my vehicle. I'm just hired to sort of do this thing. But then the officer gets all of the responses and whatnot, and then he kind of warns them about like the sharks in the river. He's like, yeah, sometimes there's sharks here, so be careful of that. And then he seems like pretty satisfied with the responses and then just gets on his way. Like, this is what I'm saying. It was so much easier to get away with crimes in the 40s and 50s. Like, I feel like I could have been like a pretty good like crime guy back then. But, you know, here we are stuck in the 2000s in the digital age where like you can't get away with anything anymore. It's fucking bullshit. Oh, bull shark bullshit. That's nothing. Anyways, moving on. The fisherman finally arrives in this like really small boat, and his name is Bob. And he starts going on about a great white shark that he caught once, and then blah, blah, blah. It was in like the newspapers or something. So he's pretty confident that he can catch this shark, but he needs 2 volunteers. So Clara volunteers, but apparently it's bad luck to have a woman on board. So dumb. And so Jimmy volunteers, and then Dylan basically voluntells the truck passenger. He's been part of this crew too, so he basically tells him to go on the boat as well. And of course he refuses at first, but then after some back and forth, like he basically just forces this kid to go on the boat with them. And so they head out on the water to go and look for the shark. Bob cuts the engine at one point and says he has a feeling that this is the spot. So they put the anchor down and he starts chumming the water. And then Bob casts a fishing line out and waits. And Jimmy and the passenger have like guns ready just in case the shark shows up. And then after a while, Bob's line starts to get pulled in, and then he tries reeling it in, but then the line breaks, and Jimmy ends up catching him from like falling in the water. And then the passenger starts like shooting into the water, but he jams the gun, so Jimmy takes it and starts shooting at the shark as they see this like fin starting to circle their boat. And then the shark bites at the motor, and Jimmy starts shooting. They all start to panic, and the shark swims off. Now, the shark here was actually, from what I can tell, a practical fucking effect. It didn't look like, again, like just to me, it didn't look like it was a CGI shark. This looked like they actually used a practical shark. Most of the other shots so far have been CGI as far as I can tell, like especially when they're underwater, because again, I don't really think they're filming underwater, but the shots have been like fairly quick, so it doesn't actually really take you out of it that much. But when it bites the motor, like we look into this thing's eye and I'm like, that's a practical fucking shark right there. I'm like, I don't think that that's a CGI shark. So that was really, really cool. I loved seeing that, and that like really started bringing me back into this movie. So after a minute, the shark rams the boat, making them all fall out, and they start trying to get back into the boat. Jimmy makes it in first, and then the passenger, and then as they try to bring Bob in, the shark gets him, and again, we get more practical shark here. And like this was mixed in with some CGI, I think, but they did such a good job at mixing the two together. It actually really helped build a lot of tension for this scene. Jimmy and the passenger then make it back to shore, and Dylan is smiling and makes jokes about the fisherman dying and all that, and Clara says that it's not really funny that a man is dead. And so Ernie starts walking away and says like, yeah, we need to report this to the police. And Dylan is like, no, you have a job to do. We're not reporting anything to the police. So Ernie throws the money at his feet and says like they're done, and he starts walking away. But then Dylan pulls a gun on Ernie, and then Yanis pulls a gun on Jimmy and Clara. And so yeah, Dylan is getting pretty pissed at this point, and he says like nothing is over till he says it's over. And like he's like, I'll feed you to the sharks if you don't do this for me. And that basically they're getting back into that river, shark or no shark. So Ernie asks like what's in the truck, and Dylan tells him, yes, it's gold, yes, it's stolen. And then Ernie says, like, that's going to take forever to get up, which is true. Like, gold is fucking heavy, so, like, it's going to take them a while to get this shit up there. And then naturally, Ernie asks, like, okay, well, what happens to us after we do this? And Dylan's like, oh, you get paid, and then we all go home. That's it. It's fine. Everybody's happy. Bullshit. Jimmy and Ernie speak native to each other for a minute, but then Yanis comes up to them and tells them to, like, speak English or don't speak at all because they don't want them, like, coming up with any plans or shit like that. So they start getting their equipment ready, and they've put this like sled together, which is basically just a skid. It just looks like a wooden skid, but they're basically going to use this as a sled to winch up the gold from the bottom. They also decide to set up like a decoy, they say, just kind of down the river. It's basically they're just putting meat on a hook to try and distract the shark while they're in the water grabbing the gold. So Clara does that and tells Yanis to watch it closely, and when it's been taken, that's their cue to start going in the water. So Ernie and Jimmy are getting suited up, and Clara tells Ernie to let her go because he hasn't been in a suit for like a long time, but he insists because he's like, this is my fault, I got us into this mess, so I'm going to go into the water this time. So Yanis watches the rope, and when it tightens, he lets them know. So Clara radios down to Ernie and Jimmy that they should be clear. So Ernie and Jimmy make their way to the van or truck following the rope that they've put out before. So they've left like a guideline for themselves so they can find their way back there. They pry the door open and start loading up the sled. And they radio to Clara saying that like it's going to take more than one trip, obviously, because it's going to be way too fucking heavy. And as Yanis is watching the rope, suddenly it goes loose again. So he starts running to Clara and tells them that like they need to hurry up because the shark is probably on their way back to them. So down below, they load up one more box, strap them down to the sled, and then they start the winch up. But then the winch stops because it's too heavy, so they take a couple of boxes off and then start the winch back up again. Jimmy then tells Ernie that he thinks the shark is back, and sure enough, it swims past them really quickly. So they get inside the truck to try and hide from it while Clara is winching up the sled. But then it gets stuck on a tree, so she radios down to Ernie and he tells Jimmy that they need to get going. They stay close together, they head for the sled, and they start to try and move like this giant log that's out of the way, but it's just way too heavy for them. But they eventually manage to free it, and they start heading back. But the shark comes and bites Ernie in the arm, and he starts bleeding, and Jimmy stabs it with a spear, and then Jimmy tells them to reel in Ernie. So Yanis starts reeling Ernie in, but the shark swims to the surface and pulls Ernie back down, biting down on him some more. So Clara keeps pulling him in. The sled makes its way to shore, so Dylan is all happy about this, obviously. And they manage to reel Ernie in, but he's in like really bad shape. He's dying basically, and he tells them that like they should run, like don't do this job, like just get the hell out of there. Clara yells over at Dylan that they need to get Ernie to a hospital, but Dylan just kind of looks at her and then goes back to looking at his fucking gold, like he doesn't give a shit. And then Ernie dies right there. Jimmy and Clara are obviously distraught, and Jimmy starts walking over to the gangsters with a knife, but they pull their guns on him. And Clara tells Jimmy to put the knife down. But Yanis and Dylan then insist, like, no, go ahead. You can have a shot at us. Like, go for it. They're like, hey, we'll even make it a fair fight. So Yanis pulls out a knife. And Jimmy is like, okay. So then he throws the knife and, like, hits Yanis almost right in the heart. It doesn't kill him, but, like, he was so close to getting him in the heart. Like, this would have been fucking amazing. And so naturally, Dylan is about to shoot Jimmy, but then Clara gets in front and explains that, like, she still needs him because, like, she needs him to, like, help her suit up and run the airlines and all that. So Dylan beats Jimmy for a little bit and says, like, first thing in the morning, they're getting in and they're getting the rest of those boxes. Morning comes, and as I said, Yanis is still alive, and he goes over to Ernie's body and he pulls out his fucking gold teeth. So these guys are just obsessed with gold in any way, shape, or form. Like, they're basically Bond villains. The passenger of the truck wakes up Jimmy and Clara and unshackles them because they were shackled together in a tent the night before so they wouldn't run away. And then Clara says she's going in the water. Jimmy tries to intervene, but Dylan insists that she go. And she can make Ernie proud of her while she's at it. And yeah, God, Dylan's just an asshole. But this actor actually played Dylan really well. Like, he was really good at playing like this 1940s gangster. He actually did a terrific job at it. And then Yanis and Jimmy exchanged some words in... I think Jimmy was speaking his native language, and I think Yanis was maybe speaking in Russian. But yeah, so I guess they don't really know what they're saying to each other, but then they just kind of go about their business. And so Clara is all suited up now, and Jimmy gives her like a pep talk and tells her to be stronger than the shark. And he tells Dylan that if she's going down there, she needs the knife. So they give her the knife so that way she can at least defend herself. And then Dylan tells her, like, once she's down there, she better not come up until all those boxes are accounted for. And then everybody can go home after that. And she questions, like, are you actually going to let us go? And he's like, yeah, of course I am. Yeah, but you better not try anything. Typical. So Jimmy puts her helmet on, and then she's on her way to the truck. She gets to the truck, and she starts loading the crates onto the sled and tells Jimmy to start winching it up, and they do. And then Clara spots the shark, and she radios this to Jimmy. So he tells her to hide until it goes away. So she gets inside the truck and waits. And then Jimmy tells her to stay put. And as she waits, she finds a gun in the truck. But just as she's picking it up, the shark is still, like, circling outside the truck. And then all of a sudden, it emerges from the cloudy waters and goes right after Clara. And it gets stuck, like, inside the truck. So she closes the door and then traps it inside the van. The sled makes its way to shore, and Clara is not far behind, and then she gives the gun to Jimmy and tells him to hide it. Dylan is happy with the gold, and then he tells his men that they're gonna take them upriver and strap the heavy boots on them and throw them in. And then Clara says that, like, well, we kept up our end of the deal, so, like, he needs to keep up his, and Dylan's like, nah. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, of course he's not. He's a fucking asshole. Of course he's not going to keep up his end of the deal. Like, what were you really expecting here? And then he tells her to put Ernie in the boat, and they're going to give him a burial at sea, just like they're going to do to them as well. And then in the truck below, we can just see the shark kind of thrashing away, trying to get out of it. And then as they're loading the body into the boat, the police officer from earlier arrives and then holds him at gunpoint. And then Clara tries to talk to the officer, and he just yells at her to be quiet. So he manages to get the gangsters to disarm, and then Clara tells them that they're hostages. But then the passenger comes out from behind a tree, shoots the police officer. They sort of trade gunfire for a bit, and the cop shoots the passenger. Dylan shoots the cop, and then Clara pulls her gun, fires at Dylan, misses, but she manages to shoot Yanis once, but then the gun is empty after that. Yanis tries drowning Jimmy, but Clara knocks him over the head with a bucket. And then Dylan comes from hiding from behind the car with a machine gun. So Clara and Jimmy jump into the water to avoid the bullets and start swimming. And now the shark is loose too. It's made its way out of the truck. Dylan gets in a boat. He starts going after them, waiting for them to surface. And then Clara emerges right beside the boat while Jimmy emerges from like further away. So Dylan is trying to shoot at him, but he keeps missing. And earlier in the movie, they mentioned too that like shooting bullets into the water just like slows the bullets right down, which is actually accurate. It's not like when you see in movies and they're like shooting relentlessly into the water and then like people are dying. It's like, no, the bullets almost, they don't immediately stop, but it like significantly slows them down. But Dylan does manage to shoot Jimmy once, so he is bleeding. But then Clara knocks Dylan out of the boat. Dylan tries shooting at Clara, but can't get a shot off, and she swims under him and then pulls him under. Jimmy makes it to shore alive before the shark can get to him, and it starts swimming back to Dylan and Clara. Jimmy yells for Clara to get out of the water, so she climbs into the boat, starts the engine up, and makes it back to shore. She grabs the gun from the passenger and holds Dylan at gunpoint, who isn't quite at shore yet. He's in like waist-high water. And he says like she's down to her last shot and then asks her if he thinks that she can make that shot. And she's like, I'm the daughter of a farmer and I'm a better shot than he was. And then he asks like, yeah, but are you a killer? And she's like, no, but she is. And then he's immediately pulled underwater by the shark. And the shark eats him in like a bloodbath. It's fucking great. So Claire tends to Jimmy's leg and he asks if she was really a farmer's daughter. And she's like, nope, my dad was a lawyer. So she was bluffing. And then it's 3 weeks later, Clara arrives at the dive shop, and inside Jimmy is working on some helmets and says that like there's some men waiting inside the office. And so one of them is a banker, and the other one represents Ernie's estate. And Ernie wrote a will, and he left the whole company to Jimmy. And then the banker tells him that there was a reward for finding the gold or whatever for £2,500. So they thank them, and then they leave. Jimmy and Clara hug, and Jimmy says they're going to go buy a boat. Clara kind of looks at a photo of Ernie on the wall, smiles, and we fade to black. And that's it. All right. So this movie wasn't quite exactly what I was hoping for, but we had some practical shark work in there. And I think that that is a huge achievement that definitely needs to be acknowledged because it is not something we see very often anymore. And when we did see it, it looked really good. I was very impressed with it. The CGI was used pretty sparingly, I would say. Like, the opening of the movie with the truck sinking in the water looks objectively pretty bad. It's not the worst thing I've seen. Like, it's still, like, pretty decent, but it's not great, and it doesn't really set, like, a great precedent for the movie, really. But the shark attacks were actually pretty well done, I would say. Like, I would say overall, this movie was actually really decent. And the whole cast was really great in this movie. I really enjoyed the whole cast. Again, the practical shark was awesome. It was used well. I feel like if this movie had been given a slightly higher budget, it would have pushed this movie from decent to, like, really fucking good. So, but there's just some limitations in the movie. And I feel like the movie is missing something. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's something missing from it because it has all of the elements there. Like, the story's not super original. Like, we've seen the whole like, oh, criminals get divers to dive for something they need, and you know, that whole thing. We've seen it in a bunch of movies before, but like the fact that this was a period piece really added something new to the genre a little bit. And like the limitations of like the dive suits and all that, like that was all really cool. But all that being said, I'm still going to give this 3 stars. Like, again, the storyline, not super original, but I feel like it's been a while since we've seen something like legitimately good. But this movie definitely kind of gives me hope for the future, especially with Beast of War, which is supposed to be like a World War II shark movie. Like, if they can make a half-decent movie like this, I think like what they're going to do with Beast of War is going to be incredible, and I'm definitely looking forward to that. But yeah, overall, this wasn't actually a bad movie. If you have a chance to see it, I highly recommend checking it out. It's not going to be for everybody because, like I said, there's still something missing from this movie, and I can't quite put my finger on it. I do wish that they would stop using this awful poster that they have on Letterboxd because it does not do the movie justice. They got to fix that. But yeah, overall, it was nice to watch like a pretty decent shark movie. Like, this was actually pretty good, so I'm very happy about that. yeah, that's all I have for this week, guys. Thank you so much for listening or watching. Don't forget, you can find me on all the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Slash, or Blue Sky, all at Bucket of Chum or Bucket of Chum Podcast. And I'll see you guys next time for even more Bucket of Chum.